Hi, Dio, neighborinos. It's Bill Whittle here in the Echo Chamber with episode, I thought it was 145, but it looks like it might be 146 of the Stratosphere Lounge. Hey, here we are. I hope everybody's doing well. Good to be here as always. Been yet another busy week, but we're starting to get the swing of things. I think probably the biggest news of the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. It's just a monumental piece of news when it gets you get right down to it, for me anyway, is we found found an editor who would be doing the right angles, and then our producer Neil is also our media guy, and he's making sure that the episodes get uploaded, posted, cross-posted, and all the rest, and editing right angles and controlling and just moving the media back and forth just to get things online for people. That, honest to God, was almost 90% of my time. And it was just killing me. It was brutal. So obviously the NRA show changed that. We couldn't have done, I don't think we could have done the NRA show. And I know for a certain fact that we couldn't have done the live show without the help from those two guys. So that's very good news. And one of the reasons it's good news is because it not only allows me to do 2 live segments a day during weekdays, but I also have to write an article for the Daily Wire and every day. And that has been a real wake-up call. Hi, guys. Hi to everybody who's saying hi in the comment section there. The reason the Daily Wire thing has been so shocking, well, I've had a couple shocks since January 3rd or 4th, I guess, something like that. Hello, Australia. And here they are kind of in order. As I've said many times, my schedule was always very chaotic and tired a lot because I was never getting up at the same time of the day, staying up till 2, 3 in the morning working on stuff, and then, sleeping in the afternoon or going home for a nap, all that nonsense. So since I've been getting up at regular hours, I've got a lot more energy, and it's a lot easier to get up and get a lot more done by getting into the office at 8:30 in the morning. So there's that. That showed me that it was possible to develop schedule discipline. But the thing that's really quite, I don't say shocking exactly, interesting certainly, reassuring maybe, is that this Daily Wire commitment, I've always felt the only thing that's ever an impediment to output here, aside from money, technical problems, and personnel, is stuff that I had to write. Writing stuff, just sitting down to write it, became really, really hard for me. The firewall's just like, I got a pretty good idea what I want to do. I just don't want to sit down and write it. Well, with the Daily Wire, I realized, I'm just going to have to write one every day. I didn't know if I could do it. And it turns out I can. What I found about this was that this is, I don't know if this is for anybody other than myself, bug around in here, but for those of you who may be writers or thinking about being writers, I think I was astonished by the fact that I was getting these things done and pretty quickly. I write these Daily Wire articles in about a half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. And what I found was, and I hope they don't take it the wrong way over at Daily Wire, what I found was when I made that decision to do that, I knew that it would have to be daily, and that put some limits on how much work you can put into it. My recollection is that Andrew Breitbart, back when we first met, 2008 or 9, he was just getting started and was thinking about doing a daily column for somebody or other. And he said, I think, again, it was certainly Breitbart, I'm sure, but it was, I think, to Mike Walsh, a friend of mine who's a terrific writer for The Post, and wrote the conservative Rules for Radicals. He's a brilliant guy and really terrific guy. Andrew Breitbart went to somebody, I think it was Mike Walsh, and said, I just don't know if I can put out a column every day that's any good. And somebody told Andrew Breitbart, Andrew, half of all the work that you're going to do and half of the work that you've already done is below average. And it just woke him up, and it just woke me up too. It's a hard thing to explain to some people. Other people understand this right away. The reason I didn't write more was because I wanted it to be really good, and because I wanted it to be really good, I would delay it or kick it around or not ready yet or don't have it fully developed. And what I found was, if I was prepared for today's column to be the most mundane thing I'd ever written, and that's okay, just get it out the door, what I found over the last 2 weeks of 10, 12 articles, something like that, I think, is that that's the attitude that wins. I sit down and I basically say, okay, this is just going to be, I'm just going to get it out the door so that I can meet my contractual obligations, and I'm not going to worry about how good it is. And then when I sit down and start writing, the next thing you know, it comes out, and almost every one of them, there's a couple of them I wasn't nuts about, but 3 or 4 of those Daily Wire columns, I thought, in fact, most of them make really good firewalls. They want 400 words from me, so needless to say, I give them 800 to 1,000. They should have asked for 200 words, and then we would have been a little closer to the ballpark. But it's illuminating, and the thing that it is illuminating about it is the fact that I could in fact be writing a firewall a day, or a TP USA video a day. Got to catch up on both of those. I got 2 of those that have to be done right away. So now I'm just trying to find the time, because now I've got the Daily Show, I've got the NRA, I've got the Daily Wire, I've got Stratosphere Lounge, I've got a lot of stuff. But more firewalls are coming, more TPUSA videos are coming, and I just have to tell myself, if you can sit down and write, one of them, you can sit down and write 2 of them. I'll sleep when I'm dead, I guess. But in any event, that's kind of what's been going on. So it's been illuminating. Excuse me while I take a quick drink of water from my exclusive Stratosphere Lounge Club cups, available now on at BillWhittle.com for delivery, I want to say in March. By the way, thank you for everybody who ordered it last time. It was just really delightful to see, 40, 50 orders just come in the space of 10 minutes. So for all of you Strata Loungers out there, this is a special family, and it always has been. I always have the deepest regard for my members and try to thank them every chance I get. But the Stratosphere Lounge people, the Strata Loungers, you all feel like family. I meet a lot of people on the road. I did an event in San Diego on Monday. Yeah, Monday night. I don't know if I've ever been better than that. It was just so much fun. And to my utter astonishment, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, to my utter astonishment, there were probably 400 or 500 people at Republican Club of San Diego. And they introduced me, and I went up to go on stage, and as I was going up on the stage, the entire room stood up. I got a standing ovation walking to the stage. And the first words out of my mouth are, well, when you get a standing ovation, when you first come up to the stage, that's an indication you should just go away, go home, and, before it gets worse. It doesn't get better than that. But what I found for it was, I found that when you start out that way with an audience that's so obviously friendly and so obviously on your side that you can, I'm always pretty loose and comfortable. And in fact, many people say I'm really my most biggest, closest to my real self when I'm up on stage doing the live events. But when you start out with that kind of a huge boost, you are just so casual and so loose. And actually, it's a great reminder. I wanted to do this for the Stratosphere Lounge, and I just reminded myself by accident. This will be fun. So anyway, I was down in San Diego. I was doing a live event. Loved it. It's a lot more fun to be winning than losing, and it was just absolutely great. So just to close the original thought, whenever I meet people on the road, it's always a pleasure to meet people who are fans. Needless to say, it's a greater pleasure and to meet people who are members. Every now and then somebody will come up to me with a copy of Silent America. That is a very moving thing for me. One person had a original first edition of Silent America. That was mind-blowing. But when I meet people from the Stratosphere Lounge, when people come and say, hey, I'm a Strata Lounger, it just feels like family. I mean, I say, what's your name? What's your screen name? Oh, yeah, okay. And, yeah, I mean, we've shared, 300-400 hours together, something like that. That's a long time. And I really like the informal nature of this show. So for those of you who are Stratosphere Lounge fans, if you're Strata Loungers and you get a chance to see the live shows, we're going to try and be more aggressive and more thorough about posting those dates. It's really a lot of fun. But just since I reminded myself here uh, of the kind of fun that you can have when you're just kind of hanging loose, having a good time, this is what I did both in Ramona and in San Diego the other week. Hang on a second, it's right here. There it is. So I got up to the microphone and I said, this is probably going to flag this video, but I don't care. I got up to the microphone and I said, I've been waiting 8 years to do this, so here we go. And that usually gets a big laugh. And after that is over, I usually say, okay, well, let's have an encore. Here's another encore that I wasn't able to do for the last several years. So it's fun. It's fun to be winning, and all the rest of it. And it's nice that I get to cover most of the daily stuff on the live show. Which, if you're not aware of it, it's every day now at 12 o'clock, and it's 12 o'clock Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and we have ourselves just an absolute blast there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm hoping now that I can simply just realized that, half of the firewalls that I write are going to be below average, and this one's probably going to be one of those. And that's kind of the escape mechanism that lets you get into the chair. Because it's the pressure of wanting to get it right, And to some degree, I'm delighted, surprised, and honored to say I've got a bit of a reputation now, and I don't want to let people down. I don't want to look like I don't want the trajectory to look like it's going down. And so far, hopefully, that hasn't been a problem. I did. It's the live shows. I start on the live shows every day, and I realize it's just going to keep coming. I'm just simply going to get. This commentary and this kind of thing is going to keep coming. And this is the last I'll say about this, which means we've got another 12 minutes on this subject. But this is also very sincere and really kind of priceless as well. I've never felt that I was the author of this stuff. I've always felt that I was just observing things and so on, but especially during a speaking event where maybe I'll do an hour live on 5 lines of notes or something like that and just rolling. I've always been delighted when they videotape the live events because I'm kind of curious to know what I said. Same thing for the live show. When you're really in the zone, I think hopefully, if you haven't had this experience, you're probably in the wrong line of work. When you're in the zone doing something that you really love and that you feel comfortable with and that you think you might be good at, you can you reach kind of a state of mindlessness. Some people call it flow. And you just become unaware of what you're doing. There's really no conscious thought to it at all. Just a case, every now and then I might glance down at a note to remember where I'm going, but by and large, I just feel like it's coming from the top, and all I am is just the mouthpiece for this. As long as that spigot is still on upstairs, or in the case of our progressives friends downstairs, then I'm just going to do my level best to relax and try and let that voice out. Anyway, that's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are handsome, and all the kids are above average. All the women are strong, all the men are whatever. It's a left-wing show anyway. I used to like it, though. Now, once again, because I was running around like a crazy man, got a little nap this afternoon, so we're going to do one of these Stratosphere Lounge on the fly kind of things. And what I mean by that is we're just going to take the questions. I didn't have time to pull them or look at them at all. and I'm going to just get them right off the website, which, of course, being Facebook cannot, there's no option that I've found. Maybe there's a very simple option and somebody can point it out to me, but I have yet to be able to discover now with this new thing how you can I just want to rank comments in order of the likes. That's all I want to do. Shouldn't be that hard. It doesn't seem, I mean, your choices here are top comments, most recent comments, or top comments unfiltered. The most relevant comments appear at the top. Well, who's to decide relevant? Sometimes I'll scroll down and I'll see things that are, oh my God, there's an 11 down there. Anyway, I'll get to those, but we're going to do a special request first because it's been passed on to me that we've got some new record here, I think. And the record is... the record belongs to Bob Neef. Hope it's Neef. Hi, Bob. And the reason Bob's the winner of the Tremendous Record Award, and Cheryl Toomey pointed this out for me, thankfully, was it appears that he has asked this question, eyes are not what they used to be, 6 times, I want to say. Usually if I see a question twice, I try to answer it, and virtually all the time at 3, I try to answer it. So, Bob, sorry about that, and as you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So, whatever you did to make the wheels of justice turn, let's just start with Bob's question, because it's a good question, and it's coming to us from way back in 1979. All right, here we go. A more concise rendition of my question from a few weeks ago. Here it comes. In the past, our American society could go after godless commies as contrary to the American way of life, but the tyranny of Islam is protected by this ideology being veiled as a religion. Do we need to tolerate a religion, actually a political system, that wants to kill us? And is the Constitution a suicide pact? No, with qualifications, and certainly no on the second one. My article today in Daily Wire, I don't know if it's up yet or not, it's called Muslim Chic, and this is just kind of a way to get to your question a little bit, Bob. So here's what I basically wrote about Muslim Chic. I saw a story on Drudge about a designer in New York City, fashion designer, who's incorporating the hijab, the headdress, into her fashions. And there's she comes out in a hijab, and it's beautifully embroidered, black with just lots and lots of silver. And then there's a couple of, as usual, New York fashion show, weird extremist kind of things. And then finally, hey, there's Bob. Hey, Bob. And finally, there's a picture of about 20 runway models, and they're all New York runway models. The only nutrition that they get is cocaine and nicotine from cigarettes. But every single one of these stick-thin Muslim-looking models, I'm sure there were very few of them actually Muslim, although she said she tried to recruit from her home country. In any event, there's 20 fashion models who look like fashion models, and they are walking down this runway, and they're dressed in very gaudy costumes. There's nothing particularly subtle about these. Gold and silvers and all these colors. Everything's very shiny and satiny, and some of them have gigantic, huge gold necklaces around their neck. Everybody's wearing some kind of jewelry. And they all have their head wrapped in the same kind of colored, kind of like a satin hijab. So here was what I wrote about, because this is kind of the issue. On one hand, it's really delightful, and to the extent that it's kind of a stylish fashion for people who are bringing their religious belief with them, I think it's great. I think it's terrific. I think it looks marvelous, and if that helps their self-esteem or whatever, even if it doesn't, if it's something available to an American citizen that wasn't available before for their hard work and freedom to purchase, then the hijab fashion line is terrific, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. There's no qualifications on that, because women wearing, chic, very expensive-looking hijabs is none of my damn business. It's none of my business. However, the Islamification of America is my business. And when I saw these New York models in these hijabs, I just felt this tremendous kind of a dread, because this is what New York would look like if this was a Muslim country. This is what New York would look like if it were a Muslim country. So that alone is just a little alarming. And then I kind of got down to the brass tacks about what bothers me and what doesn't. And I think it's pretty much, I can describe it this way. And I'm getting to your question here, Bob. As always, it takes me, 35 miles to walk 16 feet. What bothered me, first of all, is that looking at these fashion models wearing the hijab, I realized that in most of many anyway, of the Muslim countries of the world, these women would be very lucky to get away with simply being scolded and maybe pushed or hit every now and then. That would be, I think, the least bad thing that would happen to them. Wearing those kind of really gaudy clothing, that kind of attractive clothing, would get most of these people in trouble in many of the Islamic countries in the world. And that's when I realized exactly what's going on. The hijab is designed to pull attention away from women. The origin of the hijab is that if men are allowed to see women's flowing hair, they will be so overwhelmed by uncontrollable lust that anything could happen. And so the women cover their hair to protect their honor and their modesty, and their husbands can feel better knowing that their wives are going out there without their hair, driving Westerners mad with lust. And most of those people I've seen don't look like fashion models at all. So now we get to the point of the thing. She's basically making a line of clothing that celebrates a culture that, taken in its most literal form, would probably kill you for producing that line of clothing. It's a little tough. What do you say about that? And so I kind of figured it out, I think, Bob, and that's the first part of your question, then the second part. What I came to realize, and had this realization for quite a while, is that Islam, this isn't new, Islam is unique among the world's religions for many reasons, but when people talk about religious freedom in America, here's the problem with Islam. It's not a question of, gee, it's a political system as well, although that is a bit of a problem, but just put that aside for a second. If you come to America as a Buddhist or as a Hindu or as an animist or as an atheist, or you're a Wiccan or you're a Druid or you're a Jedi or whatever, you can come to America and live by American principles without compromising your religion. The two blend. You can shuffle the deck in such a way that you can do both. And it seems to me that only Islam is an exception to this case, because Islam has a number of strict of tenets in it that are written in the Quran, spoken by Muhammad, and are taken to be literally true, the following of which is not only incompatible with American Republic, it's antithetical to it. And the great example would be, if you were standing outside of that New York fashion show and you started screaming, on the street, Muhammad's a pedophile and a murderer, and it's a religion of slaves, and on and on and on and on and on. People just look at you like you're just some nut. You're some nut with First Amendment protections, speaking his mind in a crowded city that is built by and inhabited by still what is without question Judeo and mostly Christian laws. Whether or not the larger number of atheists that live there every day are aware of it, the civil structure, the freedom to go out and speak your mind, is a result of Judeo-Christian, especially Christian beliefs, and you couldn't have it without it. Now, if, on the other hand, you're living under Islamic law and you make that same decision in New York City, if New York City were Islamic and it looked Islamic, seeing these runway models, and you went out there and said the exact same thing, you'd be executed. Here in America, you can be any religion you want, including no religion. If you leave Islam, according to what's written in the Quran, I'm not making this up, I wish I was, but I'm not. That's the death penalty for that. So I think the point of the article, the point of the problem, and the one thing no one ever talks about, because we can never speak the truth out there, we never, ever, ever can talk about the real issues until finally somebody just sets, here it is, right? I mean, here it is. Here's the issue. if you are a Muslim in America, you have to make a decision. And the decision you have to make is this. Are you going to abide by the constitutional laws of the United States, which means standing next to somebody on a bus stop and listening to them denigrate the Prophet Muhammad and not do anything about it, and understand that while it's offensive to you and deeply offensive to you, that you not only do not have the ability to hit that person, you've got no right to control their speech, just that. Or are you in your heart of hearts wishing you had the power to shut that person up? And that's a decision that Western Muslims have to make. They have to make a decision as to whether to live by the laws and rules and cultural norms which the laws reflect in the Constitution, or the ones in the Quran. They just have to take their pick. But you cannot have freedom of expression and still be killed for expression, and you can't have freedom of religion and still be killed for leaving a religion at the same time. They are mutually exclusive. I'm not aware of, there may be some cases, but I'm not aware of any other religion that poses this kind of fundamental, basic contradiction in their adherents' lives. So what I basically wrapped up the article by saying is pretty much this. It's great to see you trotting down the catwalk, but I'd much rather prefer to know where you stand. You know, it's not what you're wearing, and it's not where you're walking. It's where do you stand? And why is it that we never hear this? Why is it that with all of the millions and millions of patriotic, hardworking Muslims, and I've met many of them, it's not a fiction. It's real. But why is it that we never ever, speaking to them rhetorically, why is it that we never, ever, ever see you stand up against this? Why is it that, you know, every time there's a terrorist attack, the first thing we hear from CARE, which is of course a wholly owned subsidiary of the Muslim Brotherhood, why is the first thing we hear about it the Muslim backlash? It's like, you know, some guy murders 100 people in Orlando screaming Allahu Akbar, and the first thing that we're going to hear from the Muslim community is the backlash that's going to come back and hit Muslims because of this? The reason there's a backlash, I'm sorry to say, is because, 15, 16 years after 9/11, I still have not seen any instance where essentially the unified group of American Muslims stood up en masse and said, we utterly, utterly condemn this terrorist act, and we are here to live a new life under the laws of the United States of America. Never seen it. And that's alarming to me. It's alarming to me in a way that a Buddhist is not alarming to me, because a Buddhist is not commanded by his religion to destroy the values of this country that I happen to love, and values that I think are immortal and timeless. So there's the conflict, Bob. That's pretty much it. And so to answer your question, your first part of the question, do we need to tolerate a religion or political system that wants to kill us? We have to tolerate a religion that wants to kill us, so long as the adherents to that religion don't act on that particular, on those particular strictures. In other words, we have to respect the religious freedom of Muslims in America, so long as they have made the decision to live by constitutional laws and not by Islamic ones. And if there's any evidence that they are living by Islamic laws, I don't want to wait until we're gunned down in the streets or blown up in gas stations or something. But if somebody starts to basically say, we want Sharia in America, if I ever heard anybody, native here or immigrant or not, if I ever run into anybody saying that we should have Sharia in America, I think that person should be deported to a place where there is Sharia. They can enjoy themselves enormously. It is antithetical to our beliefs. And @608 says, where is the Muslim Martin Luther? Who's going to reform Islam? Who's going to change the sort of the Catholic Inquisition into the Reformed Protestant movement? Where's that critic who's basically going to, from inside of Islam, make Islam into a modern religion? It's a shame that making something into a modern religion often means watering it down, but there are a lot of a lot of things that modern Christians don't do that early Christians did, and so on and so forth. So as far as their religious belief goes, their dress, all of it, they're entitled to that, and we have to tolerate it, I think. And the reason we have to tolerate it, Bob, is because the same reason it was explained to me when I was a little boy and my dad saw Nazis marching in Skokie, and he fought the Nazis and he wasn't very happy about them at all. And when I told him, why don't we just lock these guys up, he said, if we determine that some people are not allowed to speak their mind, then that means somebody has to decide who gets to speak and who doesn't, and that's where the danger is, Billy. So that's kind of the hair split answer to your first question. We have to tolerate the religion as long as the religion is the modified form of Islam that is practiced by so many Muslims around the world and here, and not the religion as it's written in the Quran. And this is the thing that the progressives will never admit to, and this is why we don't get any traction or any progress on this subject. Because no one will come out and say that the issue is, that the problem is that the religion commands people to kill. It commands them to kill. The religion instructs people in methods of warfare. The religion commands people to defeat non-believers and to colonize their lands. This isn't an aberration from the religion. The people that don't do those things, the civilized people, are the ones who are the apostates. They're the ones who are not following the religion. And until we get down to that, particular wedge, we're not going to have a solution to this problem. And I think that moderate Muslims living in America who've made the decision to live under the Constitution, I'd feel a lot better if I saw them stand up and say so. I want to see them stand up and say so. I want them to say, hey, I was raised Islamic, I was raised Muslim, and many of the tenets of Islam, a family-oriented, lack of, no drugs and all that other stuff, I believe in that sincerely, but I've decided that we're going to live our lives as Americans, not under Sharia, and we don't like those values. That's what we came away from. Then if I heard that, I would be enormously relieved, but I haven't heard it. And when you ask some of these people about why you haven't heard it, they'll say, well, if we say that, we could be killed. And that's when we kind of come back to the beginning, right? Yeah, that's kind of the problem, isn't it? I mean, isn't that kind of the problem? If a Buddhist blows up somebody, which is almost a contradiction in terms, but if somebody just decided to, go around and start gunning people down and start talking about Buddha, the rest of the Buddhist community would not be scared of saying this is a crazy person, it's an aberration, it's not a religion. But when you hear moderate Muslims in America and Europe, you don't hear that. You hear people who are afraid. And so having studied the history of societies that are afraid, I've made this a real point of interest for me. I know how terror starts. I know what terror does to a population. I've seen many societies living in terror. Or terror is a political weapon. Murder, beheading, stoning, throwing homosexuals off of a building. Those are designed to promote terror, and they're designed to promote terror because they're done in public. You can't claim that it's even a religious thing in GCS. It's a brutal religion. If it was a religious punishment, if it was a civic punishment to do these horrible things, then women would be stoned in private, and homosexuals would be killed behind bars, and all the rest of it. It's done to terrorize the population, show them what happens to you if you decide to leave Islam or if you decide to criticize Islam. As with everything else that we see out there, it's just another form of power from people who have to tell other people what to do, and it's a particularly brutal one. So the other problem is this. With the hijab culture, and that is that as much as it's painful for moderate Muslims, and it's painful for me too, believing in freedom and believing in people's right to be left alone, but the facts are that every time a liberal Western democracy admits Muslims in large numbers, the pattern appears to be pretty consistent, and that is that certain things happen. When the Muslim population reaches 2 or 3%, something else happens. When it gets about 7, 8%, and when it gets above 10%, something else happens. It gets more and more and more radicalized. It gets more and more demanding, more and more brutal, more and more violent. And we didn't just see this once. It's not a one-off fluke. It's happening. It's all happening everywhere, and that is alarming to people who are not Islamic. And in this article, the woman, the designer, she's from, I want to say, Indonesia, as I recall, and the vice consul from Indonesia, a woman, said, "Oh, we think this is wonderful. It's a great chance for people to see the real Islam, and especially when we've been getting a lot of bad press lately. You've been getting a lot of bad press lately because people have been murdering other people in the most bloodthirsty, brutal fashion they can find, trying to get as much attention as possible, shouting out your core religious belief." And that's why you're getting some bad press. It's not like somebody decided to, slander you guys. It's real, and it happens. And again, I think this is the issue for me. Why don't we hear an ongoing chorus of denial, an ongoing, just a sort of a perpetual, hey, look who it is. Hey, baby. Why don't we hear an outcry? Why aren't Muslim Americans as upset about this as non-Muslim Americans? They may be, but they say that, there's no sign of it, and that's an indication that this religion is different and dangerous. So there we go. I hope that did it for you, Bob, and I'm sorry it took us a whole incredible, insane 6 tries for me to get to that question. We usually do a little better than that. All right, so on the fly now, we are going to start taking them as they come on the Facebook page, and we're going to do it in ranked order. So here we go. Looks like Victor. I'm going to go with Cuck on this. It's K-U-K, and just only hesitated there simply because of that, that word that alt-right loves to throw around is just really, really, really disgusting to me. I just hate it. In any event, this is not him. So here's what he wrote. He said, singer Joy, is it Villa? I know who she is. I didn't know who she was until a day ago. Recently wore a Donald Trump-themed dress to the Grammys, and subsequently sales of her album increased 54 million%, raising her to the top. Will this help push the message that conservatism is acceptable to Hollywood? I don't know if Joy, by the way, she was wearing this enormous sequin dress, and it says "Make America Great Again," I think, and then the entire train just said Trump. And needless to say, she's been vilified by the left for this, just absolutely vilified. And I hope she's making a statement of genuine principles, but let's just think about, because you asked an economic question. Let's just look at what happened. She was completely, essentially, by me anyway, and by most people, I keep my ear relatively close to the ground, she went from being unknown to having half of the country like her. It's not the half that the other singers are liked by, but it's half of the country, and sales just skyrocketed. You're welcome, Bob. So it was a brilliant move career-wise, and I think to answer your question, Victor, will the fact that being saying you're a supporter of Donald Trump, will that increase your box office? And the answer, I think, is it depends on where your box office is right now. If you are already successful and even famous, or if you would like to be by the traditional channels, then coming out in favor of Trump like that is a suicidal move at this moment in time. It's suicidal. Your career's finished. The only people that can do this and survive are forces of nature, like Clint Eastwood, for example, or John Voight. They are such monumental talents, and frankly, most of their work behind them, they can afford to do these kind of things, and they just simply shrug off the consequences. But if you're a young actor, or even mid-level actor, somebody appears in movies every now and then, and you believe this and you say it, you're a conservative or whatever, you're in favor of Donald Trump, and you say it, your career's over, it's done. And I've seen this from the inside for many, many years. So I would say for most people, Victor, and the answer is coming out as a conservative or using a conservative message is career suicide, and yet there is in fact, sweetheart, somebody, the guy who took me down to Florida and gave me my Air Force Squadron name, just wrote something to you in Cyrillic, and I just have no idea what it is, which you can monitor from over there. It's like, oh, where to go? I just had to stop there. I don't see Cyrillic that often. Where'd it go? It's our friend Vipercheck, Foghorn, and hey, there she is, everybody. Say hi. There, right there. What's that say?
Я друг вашего жениха Майкла. I am a friend of yours, fiancé.
Is that what? Oh, what a sweet thing to say. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
We're fans of yours too. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Foghorn, my boy. That was the second big nice thing you've done for me. Gave me really probably the best day I ever had in terms of manly pursuits, and that was very, very sweet. So here, back to your question for you here, Victor. What she did, if it's a business move and it's calculated, then it's genius. If you have decided, and I kind of made this decision, 12 years ago, something like this. I was working as an editor in Hollywood, and I was working as like all other editors. I was a freelancer, and just here's a gig. You're going to edit a show for the Discovery Channel. You're going to be working for 6 weeks, and here's another gig, and this one's lucky you got 3 years out of it or whatever. If you want to do that kind of work, which is the enormous bulk of work available out here in Los Angeles, then that's suicide. And just as I was leaving editing and getting into punditry, I was already starting to feel a little bit of that backlash. But if you're a nobody and you realize, and I don't mean to call her a nobody, but let's just speak about it in that fashion. If you're essentially a nobody and you do something that dramatic, you then become. My God, the numbers of people saying hello to you is just astonishing. Nobody listens to my show anymore. I'm telling you, nobody gives a damn about what I say. They're just waiting for you to come in so they can look at you and say hi. You can see how economically it's genius. Oh, where can we see her work? It's fotomelnikova.ru, fotomelnikova.ru. It's awful good. So it's kind of genius. You went from pretty much obscurity to being beloved by half of the country. That's a brilliant move. And in order for that to work, you have to be the product. In other words, if she was an editor, if she was a composer, if she was, any of the working people in show business, just an actor, regular two-bit actor or something like that, then it's suicide. But since she is her own product, it's genius. Now, as you say, her sales have skyrocketed because she did something so unbelievably different for somebody in Hollywood. They came out in favor of Donald Trump for president. And while that would be suicide for anybody else, if you've got your own record out there, you now have 65 million fans that you didn't have a microsecond before the cameras got turned on. And your sales are going to go through the ceiling, and they will come back for second albums, especially if you put some kind of patriotic thing in there. So yes, it's kind of a trick question, Victor. It is. I think it's a death sentence for anybody trying to make it inside the system here, especially people that can't capitalize on their own work. There's, like, for example, there's a lot of actors out there who could make that kind of thing and get all kinds of Facebook likes, but how do they turn that into money? Because their traditional career is over. She can sell albums, make money that way. So I think it was really cool, and I think it was a very good decision. And whether it was driven by economics or patriotism or both or neither, it was certainly not only a pleasure to see, it was also fun to watch her risk pay off. Okay, moving down here, let's see. Dave Wellman is back. Hey, Dave. Dear Mr. Whittle, I and many other conservatives have become increasingly annoyed that fascism and Nazism are put into the far right of the political spectrum. Wikipedia is the main offender. Could it be that Europe did not experience the Enlightenment, which would be Locke, Burke, Jefferson, Monroe, as the United States has? Instead, they got the French Revolution and idealism, Hegel and Engels and Marx from their perspective. A despotic tyranny is right and a democratic tyranny is left. Wow. We get some good questions here. Normally, I like, what's your favorite color? Or, what was your pet's name? My understanding, David, I don't have it solidly anchored, just anecdotally from somewhere, but my understanding is that the original origin, not the secondary origin, the original origin. I used to work at the Department of Redundancy Department, and I'm here to tell you that's not good English. The origin of left and right wing was, I think it was in the German Reichstag, but it was some political party, some political assembly, like the Congress, like the House of Representatives, where certain people who were kind of communist sat on the left side and people who were the fascists sat on the right side, so the left of the House, the right of the House, and so on. Jonah Goldberg just nailed this to the wall, and I've just run with the idea once it was introduced to me. I think Jonah Goldberg said, when communism and fascism fight each other, it's like a cola war. It's like Coke against Pepsi. We're neither of those two things. We are the exact opposite of both of them, which seems paradoxical in a way, doesn't it? Because if you put Nazis on the right, and just take all of the opprobrium off of it just for a second, just to understand the geometry. If you put Nazis on the far right and communists on the far left, then where are you? The whole analogy breaks down. There's no usefulness to it, and the reason there's no usefulness to it is because it doesn't reflect any sort of division into America. There are a microscopic number of Nazis in America, slightly larger number of actual communists, and left and right don't make any sense here by that definition. That's why whenever we get to, especially when we're talking to young people, I always get to the heart of it, and this is also tied up with the idea that, Republicans used to be liberals, and that, well, you're a conservative. Yes, I'm a conservative. I'm trying to conserve classical liberalism. Labels, labels, labels. Everything's sliding around. Everything's a mess. There is one distinction that I found to be universally good and is pretty much foolproof, at least in my experience, and that is, I think it comes down to, politically, there are collectivists and there are individualists. And that's pretty much it. If you look at it that way, you realize that both the Nazis and the communists are essentially the same thing. They're gigantic, big state collectivists who believe that the individual human being doesn't exist as we understand the term. They're cogs in the giant social machine. They should be willing, in fact, eager to sacrifice their only life for the greater good of the state, and that is what collectivists believe. Individualists believe precisely the opposite. They believe that the only reason there's a state in the first place is so it can protect my private life. It can protect my private property. It can protect me from predation and murder and all the rest. Otherwise, leave me alone. I'm an individual. I'm the only Bill Whittle that's ever lived on this earth and there ever will be, and there's only one of me in all of time and space, which is pretty cool. That just applies to me, by the way. The rest of you, there's millions of you. Billions, probably. But in any event, we don't belong there. It's a false dichotomy. When you say communists are on the left and Nazis are on the right, you basically gone around the back and connected, behind you. Do you want to be both of them, by the way, as I'm sure you know, both of them, the Nazis and the communists, both of them in their names, their official names for themselves, basically both called themselves socialist. Nazi stands for, Nazi is a contraction, it's an anagram of National Socialist German Workers' Party, and the Soviet Union was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So both the far left and the far right are socialist. Both the far left and the right are big state totalitarians, and Tea Party people and constitutional lovers don't fit anywhere on that spectrum, because that is a spectrum of collectivists. And we're individualists, this is where it gets interesting for me morally. I've used this argument before, especially on college campuses. The core belief of collectivism seems to make not only sense; it seems to be the only moral choice. Collectivists, I'm trying to be fair to them, totalitarian swine that they are, Collectivists will say that what is good for many people is more important than what's good for one person, and that seems to make an awful lot of sense. You can say, in your individualist society, all of this effort is applied to one person when there are all these other people in need. Surely the moral greater good would be to take care of as many people as possible with whatever resources you have. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, and it makes a lot of sense from just a, hey, you know what, that sure seems like a good idea to me, kind. But, and this is where I like to have fun with these people, but if you take it to its logical extreme, you come up with a very, very different world than the one we find ourselves living in and the one that we want to find ourselves living in. For example, if it's true that the greater good is what should be determining our actions, then I don't see any reason really to have a fire department. At the very least, I don't see any reason ever for firemen to go into a burning building. Why would you risk the lives of 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 men and women in their absolute prime who are able to contribute so much to society to go into to rescue an old woman whose life is almost over, or a cat for that matter? What on earth would prompt that decision from a collectivist point of view? It's absolutely nuts. If a soldier is wounded in a sort of a no man's land kind of thing, there's no conceivable reason for collectivists to go out and rescue that guy, because if you try, the chances are not only good, they're practically 100% that more people are going to be hurt or even killed in the rescue attempt. So why would you send 10 people or 20 people out to possibly get hurt or killed in order to rescue one person? Doesn't make any sense according to the collectivist worldview of, you got to do the best, the greater good for the most people. And what you find when you end up with the end of that belief system of being a collectivist, you find out that you're only dealing with theory. Everything is reducible to this is the greater good for the most people. Everything gets reduced to that. And unfortunately, in some cases, that comes down to things like, we're going to have to kill the Jews, and Jeff really feel bad about it, but that's going to be better for German society. Or these kulaks, these farmers who maybe hired another peasant. It's a peasant who owns a little bit of land, maybe owns an ox or a cow or something. They're stealing all of the food and keeping it and hoarding it for themselves, so we'll have to kill all of them too. Because once you get into this collectivist mindset, you realize that the world they've created is not a gentle world, it's a horror. They've built a machine made out of people, and the people are disposable cogs in that machine, and the only people who are not disposable cogs are the people at the top. I noticed that Lenin didn't launch his revolution and then go back to, was it Ekaterinburg or wherever he came from? He didn't launch his revolution and then go back. Stalin didn't get the Soviet Union through World War II and then retire in obscurity in Georgia. Mao didn't come out of nowhere and then just simply after he's launched the communist revolution go back. And of course, the classic example, the most unbelievable example, is Fidel Castro is fighting for the working man. He's a collectivist, and we're all in this together. And Cuba's going to be a society where everybody shares and no one has anything more than anyone else. And so you starve for 3 generations of Cubans, and then when Fidel Castro dies, you find out that his personal bank account has $900 million. And they all do, right? There's a pretty compelling argument that Vladimir Putin, who is at the very least a product of that system when it existed. It doesn't exist anymore. There's a fairly compelling argument that he might be the richest man in the world because he owns so much of this gigantic, huge country. So when people talk about socialism as being fair for everybody, what they're really talking about is I'm going to have the legal power to coerce you to do whatever I want to, and we're still going to have a social pyramid. And the problem is, if you don't know the right people, you don't get to move. Here in America, you get to move up and down as much as you would like. Now, conversely, individualists have a different view. And to me, it's not only a more moral view, it makes the kind of world I want to live in. And this is why it works so well. If you are an individualist and there is a wounded soldier out in the middle of a field, we'll send the entire platoon out there. We'll send the whole army if we have to get that person back. It doesn't make any sense at all on a calculation of human lives as stacks of wood or lumps of coal. It doesn't make any sense to sacrifice 30 lumps of coal to save one lump of coal, but that's not what we believe. We believe that that person out there in no man's land, lying on the ground bleeding out, is unique, and there's never been another person like him, and there never will be again. And he has family, and he has relatives, and he has probably children, and he's loved by many people and needed. And here's the part where it gets to be a little tough to explain to some people. But basically, what we say when we send somebody into a burning building, or when we try to rescue a soldier out there, when we follow the tenets of individualism, what we're basically saying is we are willing to give up the only life we have in order, or at least risk it, the only life we have in order to save somebody who's only got one life as well. And what's inherent in this is that we would expect and hope people to do that for us as well. And I want to live in a society where the full resources of society are mobilized to save individuals where they can be saved. And this is the essence of what a military person is and does. This is the essence of the warrior spirit, as I understand it from the outside. People go into the military because they want to defend this country. And what they're basically saying is, I'm willing to put my life at risk in order to protect all of the stuff that we see here, because I find the stuff that we see here to be beautiful. And I'm 20 years old, or I'm 40 or whatever, and I grew up in freedom. I was able to do whatever I want to. I wasn't afraid a day in my life of saying what I wanted to. And it might be worth my life to go out there and protect that for other people, because other people are individuals as well. And that is very different from a conscript who's being forced to take a position, human wave into machine guns, because if he turns around and runs, he'll either be executed when they catch him, or they'll have a blocking regiment or something back there where they'll gun down their own people. It's very different. Now, by happy coincidence, this ties into another question coming up, and where did it go? I'll try and get to it. Hey, yeah, there we go. It ties into a Chris Johnson question, so hold that thought about individualists versus collectivists in warfare. And Chris says, Mr. Whittle, it's well known how much you enjoy Mark Twain, but I was wondering if you still had time for pleasure reading, specifically books outside the realm of politics or government. If yes, what was the last book you read? What book are you currently reading, or the next book you want to read? Very respectfully, Chris Johnson. Thank you, Chris, and very respectfully, I appreciate people who say things like very respectfully. Right now, I'm reading the best book I've read in 10 years, I think. And the part about it that's so embarrassing is it's just been under my nose for so long. I'm reading a book called Carnage and Culture by Victor Davis Hanson, who we worked with over at PJTV and who I've sat across from in several live events, and I'll go up to him and say hi and just tell him how much I enjoy his work, and he seems to look at me with a fair amount of attention when I'm on stage, so that's a high honor for me. Carnage and Culture takes a look at 10 battles in history. Some of them are very famous and well-known, Ceramus and Midway and maybe Rorke's Drift, and others are much more obscure. But the entire book has a thesis, and the thesis is absolutely nailed to the wall by Victor Davis Hanson. He just nails it to the wall. His thesis is that free people fight far better than slaves, and it's not just that simple. It's not just that, okay, on this trimene we have a bunch of free Greeks rowing, and on the other one we have a bunch of slave Persians rowing. It's not just that simple. His overarching thesis is that free people produce a society that generates so much capability, let's just use that word in this particular case, that the Western way of war is unchallenged. And Dr. Hanson says some things in that book that are so obvious. This is the kind of thing I love, and this is why I do the work I do. Sometimes things are so obvious that they're just invisible. You can't possibly see them because you got your toes right up against them. You just simply cannot see them until somebody points them out to you. And what he was pointing out was things like, yes, it's true that in the Zulu Wars at Isandlwana, a gigantic British company of 1,600 men, something like that, was wiped out by Zulus. It's true that those colonials beat the Europeans in that particular battle because the Europeans didn't fight by the rules like infantry squares that had made Europeans invincible in battle. But what he says time and time again is the fact is that particular group of Englishmen were massacred by Zulus, but they were massacred by Zulus in Zululand, and the idea of Zulus invading Britain and having that battle on the fields of Wales or something, that's inconceivable. It's inconceivable. And that's a profoundly good point. He talks about Cortez's conquering of the Aztecs in Mexico, in Tenochtitlan, and how something like 800 conquistadors, 800 Europeans, maybe reinforced to 1,500 or something, basically knocked over an organized empire of 3, 4, 5 million people. Tenochtitlan had more people in it than any of the capitals back in Europe, and 1,000 men, essentially, who were sick, physically ill, wounded, alone, with no real supply lines, anything. These people militarily defeated an entire empire. And he talks about the why in a way so that as you watch these battles through history, all 10 of them are in order. So you begin to see the roots of it, and then as the roots begin to grow, you begin to see why. You begin to see why we won at Midway, because we understand why we won at at Salamis or something like that. It's a continuous string, and he keeps talking about a term I'd never heard before, which is shock warfare. And we don't appreciate how unique it is because it's been so successful that everyone tries to employ it. But basically the West, the Greeks, invented shock warfare because they were free people. And what he refers to as shock warfare is warfare prior to the Greeks, hoplites coming along in their phalanxes. Warfare was basically almost a ceremonial kind of thing. You'd go out there and throw some spears, and they'd throw some spears, and where this land is has been contested, and and this tribe kills 14 of those guys, and those guys kill 26 of these guys, and therefore they get the land, and so on and so forth. He said it's the nature of free citizens to simply say, if this threat is out there, we're going to eliminate it. And by shock warfare, that means we're going to put everybody we can get onto a battlefield, and we're going to find the center of their military force, and we are going to run into them, and we're going to knock them down, and when they're done, it's over. So what Dr. Hansen goes on to point out is that free people, not only do they win battles, and against the Aztecs, it was something like 250 to 1. That's just the warriors. He talks about Rorke's Drift, a conflict that I've studied for years, and it's absolutely amazing. By the way, if you ever want to see a terrific war movie, and a respectful war movie, I cannot recommend Zulu highly enough. 1964, I want to say, it's Michael Caine's first movie, Michael Caine, and it's about Rorke's Drift. And if you don't know the story of Rorke's Drift, then I'm not going to spoil it for you. But go rent a movie called Zulu, and the thing that's interesting about Zulu, especially for 1964, is that it is extremely respectful and honest to the Zulus. It doesn't just treat them as a bunch of ooga booga, bad guys. You get to understand them, and you get to see their methods of warfare, and you get to see the courage that they had, just the raw, naked courage of running across a field into 400, I'm sorry, it's nothing like that number, but maybe 100 redcoats who are firing a Martini Henry rifle at you, the bullet of which is it's the size of like a biscuit. I mean, it's a 50 caliber bullet, I'm pretty sure. And it's made out of soft lead, and it doesn't go very fast, so when it hits somebody, they basically explode. And so it's a very fair, I think, true story. And while it celebrates the heroism of the people at Rorke's Drift, the British stand at Rorke's Drift after just literally hours after the biggest catastrophe in the British Empire's history up to that point, prior to World War I. So you get the full measure of this European courage, and you get the full measure of what Europeans are capable of when you see this movie. And this is another point that Victor Davis Hanson makes continuously throughout this book. He says he says that Westerners show a great deal of heroism, but so do our adversaries. The Turks and the Persians and the Aztecs and the Zulus and the Japanese and the Vietnamese. They all show tremendous heroism. It's not a question of heroism. It's a question of what's important. And he basically makes the case that the Western way of war comes down to this. We Westerners define heroism not by bravery, but by our commitment to discipline. In other words, take an example of the Rorke's Drift. You've got maybe 100, 120 British redcoats in the middle of Zululand, and 4, 5, 6,000 warriors come after them. The Zulus considered heroism to be the person that would go out there and kill the most people. They used to keep something like scalps, I forget what it was, or some kind of a body part or something to show how many people they killed. And you really couldn't even settle down and get married until you'd washed your sword in the blood of an adversary. So the Zulus were tremendously brave, but they valued individual prowess in warfare, and that meant how many people has this individual warrior killed. And the European definition of heroism in combat is discipline. In other words, nobody ran away. Everybody stood at their position, and everybody protected their other soldiers to either side of them. And that's what heroism is following the discipline that Western Army has. It goes all the way back to the Greeks. The Greek warriors were unbeatable, not only because they fought harder than slaves do. They're fighting for their land and their lives and their families. And slave armies they have no choice. It's not a contest who's going to provide the most enthusiasm there. But mechanically, because these were free people and because they understood the value of working together, the Greek hoplite soldiers invented the phalanx. They invented the idea of a group of soldiers with shields, and the shields are arranged in such a way that many times one person's shield is covering the other person, another person to his side. So it's a wall of shields and a wall of long spears, and it was undefeatable. You simply couldn't beat it. A Greek phalanx that went against anything won because of the discipline, because this wasn't about individual battles or heroism. It was about maintaining discipline and order and having that phalanx, the shock of that phalanx hitting the enemy, and watching them dissolve under that pressure. And because of the societies, too, he takes a look at a couple of examples. Vietnam is one. The Tet Offensive is one of the battles. What's a really good one? What was it? It's kind of a defeat. It's escaped me for a moment, but it'll come back to me. Basically what he's saying, even when the West is defeated on the battlefield, which doesn't happen very often, it's not the end of the war. It's really the beginning of the end of the war for the other guys. If non-Westerners beat a Western army through superior numbers or just Western stupidity, I mean, Isandlwana in Zululand was a classic example of the British nullifying every single advantage they had, put everybody in a long, thin line, and no one could get to ammunition. And if they put the ammunition in the center of a British square, they'd be fine. So what he's also saying is that when on those occasions where the Westerners lose a battle, that's usually the end of the war in terms of, it's pretty much over by that point. And it's over for the enemy. When the West loses a battle against non-Westerners, especially something bloody like Isandlwana, then that's the beginning of the end of the war, because free societies, Western societies, simply rally, and they decide that now we're really in this fight, and they get more aggressive rather than less. They build more weapons rather than fewer ones. They enlistments go up, and it's the beginning of the end for the enemy. He was talking in Midway about the tremendous heroism of the Japanese, and Japanese naval officers didn't need any proving, and the skill of the Japanese pilots, especially after Pearl Harbor and the Philippines and all the rest, that didn't need any proving either. He said what made Midway a win for the Americans was their individualism, was their ability to adapt to the situation that they found rather than the situation that was planned. In the military, they say the enemy gets a vote too, and no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. So in Midway, Yamamoto had this incredibly intricate, way over complex plan where he's gonna, launch an attack on the Aleutian Islands, and they're gonna simultaneously hit Midway, and they're gonna do all this, split up all their forces. But the Americans cracked their code, and he said that Dr. Hansen said one of the reasons they cracked their code is because they're individualists. If you saw the movie, what was the movie about Turing? Somebody will tell me in a minute. Alan Turing broke the Enigma code, the Nazi German code, was primary in breaking that. And when you look at the code breakers in Britain and the same group of people in America, the code breakers were just shockingly unmilitary people. He's got a tremendous line there. We won Midway primarily because we broke the Japanese codes. We knew where they were going to be, and we knew when they were going to be there. And Victor Davis Hansen says thousands and thousands and thousands of proud and brave Japanese soldiers are going to die that day because of a man in his slippers in a room someplace, because the codebreaker wore slippers because he was an individual. So all of this is just really interesting to me, needless to say, and the idea of innovation comes from freedom. In other words, if you're this happened at Midway quite a lot. If you're a pilot and you're sent to attack a certain vessel, let's say sink a carrier or something, and you arrive on the scene and you find all 4 of the Japanese carriers are on fire, if you were part of a dominant society and you didn't follow orders and hit those carriers, then you could be punished and maybe you'd be executed. But since Westerners don't have to worry about that because they're individualists and because their lives and their rights are protected even in the armies, they could get to the scene and say, well, okay, those were my orders, but those ships are already gone. They're destroyed. Now let's start taking out some of the other ships. Let's just flow. Let's adapt. I seem to remember my dad saying that the difference, really, the reason that we beat the Germans in the West so thoroughly was because a second lieutenant could look at a little town in France or Belgium or something, and he'd sit up on a ridge with his binoculars, and he's got a company of people behind him. He's got maybe 20 guys, and he says, I think we can take that town. And he doesn't have to go back to higher command. It's good to do it, but he says, I can take it. We can do it. And he just goes. He just goes and does it. While a Nazi would have to wait for that chain of command. He'd have to pass it up, to division, and then it would go to the OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, and then the generals would have to make a decision. It'd probably have to be weighed in by Hitler as well. And by the time that message comes back down again, it's over. The opportunity's gone. Patton took a town and told Ike he was going to take this town, and Ike wired him back, don't take the town, it's going to be too expensive. And Patton wired him back saying, well, I've taken the town, do you want me to give it back? And that kind of flexibility and fluidity is essential in modern warfare. But again, back to the original point, the idea that the Aztecs could have been fighting the Spaniards in Spain is inconceivable. It's inconceivable. And when we deal with opposing armies today, like the Iraq war, for example, we're dealing with people who have purchased Western weapons, but they don't know how to use them. I don't mean they don't physically know how to use them. I don't mean they don't mechanically know how to use them. They don't know how to deploy them. Deploy them and employ them. For example, I remember the greatly missed Stephen Dembest when he was writing at USS Clueless, and he was talking about a situation where Iraqis in the Iraqi army prior to the invasion, it was probably after the Iran-Iraq war, he was talking about a situation where the Iraqi army had just taken delivery of a bunch of new tanks, Russian tanks, probably T-72, something like that. They were not cutting-edge Russian tanks, but they were good tanks, very good tanks. And the Iraqi army bought a bunch of them. And what happened was the captain or whoever, the colonel, probably a general, whoever was in command of those tanks, basically collected all of the operating manuals from the tanks and held on to them himself. And he told the people how these things would work. And if you had a question about how a tank worked, you couldn't just open the book and look. You had to go and ask the boss, because he wanted to maintain this level of control that's a very Eastern thing. It's just very Eastern. I'm the boss and you're not. And how dare you start a tank without asking me how to do it? He took the operating manuals out of all of these tanks and made himself the single point of failure, which is what it was. And that sounds ridiculous to us in the West, because because we're individualists. We understand that command is not something magical about being a superior officer. In many cases, and maybe you could only make the case in most cases, the superior officers who you would expect to make the decisions are so far out of what's actually happening that they're the worst people to make the decision. In the United States Army, as Den Best said, if you wanted an artillery strike that was ordered by a general on the direct orders of Saddam Hussein, in the American Army, a sergeant can call in an artillery strike. A sergeant can call in an airstrike. A sergeant can simply say, I am looking at a target, and there it is, and here's the grid coordinates, and hit it. And they don't have to worry about it because he's an individual. He's a trained soldier. He knows what he's doing. We don't have this dominant stuff to worry about. So, in any event, Chris, is the best book I've read in a long time. Not just for the content, which fascinates me. It's just so well written. It's just so well written. It's like a novel. You absolutely feel like you're there. And since the show is all about, digressing back and forth, just to give you, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, an idea of what ancient battles were like. What's generally considered to be the greatest single victory in military history is the Battle of Cannae in Rome. I thought it was Cannae or Cannae. Apparently it's Cannae, Cannae. And in that battle, Hannibal from Carthage brought his army across the Alps, and Carthage is in northern Africa. Used to be, before the Romans utterly destroyed it and plowed salt into the earth where it used to be so that nothing could grow there. Hannibal is running up and down the Italian peninsula, beating the Romans here and there, everywhere. And finally, Rome decides, we've had enough of this Hannibal guy. So they take a number of legions, lots and lots of guys, 70,000 maybe, something like that, maybe more. And they go after Hannibal. And the Romans in command of those legions did the exact same thing that the British did at San Luana. They managed to find a way to neutralize every advantage they had, which in this case was numbers, because the weapons were more or less the same. And Cannae was an example that I was looking for earlier. Because what he said was that after the defeat of the Romans at Cannae, which was the worst defeat in history, Rome didn't just give up. That Rome just replaced that army. They replaced it within 2 years. They just recruited more guys and put more money into it, and within 2 years they had that army back again. And within 4 or 5 years, Carthage is over. It's gone. It's just simply disappeared from the face of the earth, because Rome was a Western structured republic at the time, and the people there decided they didn't want to deal with this Hannibal anymore. So let me just tell you about Cannae, though, because it's just mind-boggling for me. So the classic victory at Cannae basically worked like this. Hannibal's outnumbered, not enormously, but significantly. The Romans, for some reason that's unknown to anyone, decide to fight Hannibal where he stands, which was in a relatively narrow valley, which means that the Romans, who have enormous numerical superiority, don't get to simply stretch out. If you could have stretched out Hannibal's line was a mile, let's say, of guys standing side to side, the Roman line would be 2.5 miles. You simply walk around them. But no, they decided to deploy into this relatively narrow valley, which meant that at the point of collision, both forces are equally matched, because the Romans have a lot more depth, but they can only bring so many guys into the fight at the same time because they're constrained by the terrain. So Hannibal's plan was pretty simple. And Hannibal was, without question, an absolute genius, just a genuine genius. So Hannibal knew his enemy, and he knew his people too. And what Hannibal did was he put his most experienced troops on the far left and the far right. They were virtually out of the fight. Nobody even really knew it was there, honestly. They were just almost like spectators. The main part of the fight occurred in the middle of the valley, and Hannibal had a convex shape, like a lens, So the center of the bulge was facing the Romans. And the Roman army collides with that kind of shock combat with the Carthaginians, and a serious, serious fight breaks out. Hannibal's most reliable troops are out in the wings. He needs to be able to depend on those people. The people in the middle, at the contact with the Romans, are the ones who were likely to break. They were his worst troops, and that's why Hannibal was there in person. He was standing there, maybe 2 or 3 people deep from the Roman army for 10 hours, something like that. Because Hannibal understood the Romans so well and understood their arrogance and their sense of invincibility, Hannibal's entire battle plan was simple. He made this convex shape so that the Romans would contact it first, and then as the battle progressed, Hannibal very slowly, because this had to be believable, very slowly started to withdraw. He started to back up, and the Romans put more and more troops into there because they're winning. And then Hannibal backs up his line even more, and Romans push more and more and more people into this little valley. They're just packing them in, and they're packing them in so tight that the soldiers cannot raise their hands. They can't throw a spear. They can't use their swords. They're like people. They're like people on board a subway or a bus that's packed to the limit. Their hands are at their side, and Hannibal falls back more and more and more. And now what was convex now becomes concave, and the Romans keep pursuing because the Romans are sure that they've got this thing won. And then all of a sudden, Hannibal's 2 wings of highly reliable troops, African troops, I want to say, come crashing in on the sides of these guys and start attacking them from the sides where they don't have any armor protection. And all of a sudden, the Romans are thrown into a state of confusion, and then Hannibal puts a very mobile group, I suspect it was cavalry, behind the Romans. And now they're surrounded. And there's something like 60,000 of them, something like this, where the only people that can fight are the people in contact with the Carthaginian army, but everybody else is in the middle of this group of 60,000 people. They don't get to fight because they can't reach anybody, can't even raise their swords. Here's the part I wanted to tell you about, just because the shock of it is so unbelievable. So, in the greatest military victory in history, Hannibal surrounds these Roman legions, something like 50, 60,000 people. And he kills every single one of them. And it takes 8 hours. And it's like a creature being devoured by piranhas. The entire Roman army was destroyed pretty much to a man from the outside in. The people in the middle, for most of the battle, didn't even know what was going on, let alone be able to fight. This is a tightly compacted group of people. And they're panicked. They're absolutely panicked. And the Carthaginians are surrounding them, and they're picking off the Romans from the outside in. And it took 8 hours to do. It was something like 300 men per minute. 300 Romans per minute had to be killed to take out that entire army. And 300 men per minute were killed for 8 hours. And when the battle was over, the Carthaginians under Hannibal found that some of the Roman soldiers had dug a hole in the earth, a little hole, like, this big, and stuffed their faces into it so that they would suffocate themselves, because the terror of watching all of their friends and fellow soldiers being massacred for 8 hours was so overwhelming that they simply lost their minds, and they tried to commit suicide in that fashion. Man, so 50,000 people, 60,000, and they're rotting out there in the sun in southern Italy because the West forgot how to fight in a Western way. And Hanson's point with Canny is, if that had been any other culture on Earth, that kind of defeat would have meant the end of the war. But for Rome, it meant the beginning of the war. Rome, composed of free citizens at the time of the Republic, said, okay, all right, we've just had our asses handed to us. Now it's time to get serious. And that's pretty much the rule for every democracy, right? We live our happy and fat little lives, and then somebody thinks that means that we're weak and stupid, and so they pull a Pearl Harbor on us, or they pull a 9/11 on us, and they think that initial smack in the nose is going to cause us to recoil, and if not surrender, then certainly just back up and redraw the line. Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and overran the Pacific the first 6 months of the war. They actually genuinely believed that they knew they couldn't beat America in the long run. They didn't think they'd have to. They bombed Pearl Harbor to destroy the American fleet because they were convinced that if the American Pacific fleet was destroyed, then America would retreat. That America's boundary would not be Midway or Pearl Harbor. That America would retreat to the American mainland, and these little zones of controls would be redrawn. Hardly any of them, maybe Yamamoto, who designed it because he'd spent some time in America, but hardly any of them understood the character of Americans or free people or individual citizens. Hardly any of them understood that act of a sneak attack would be so offensive to Western sensibilities that the second those bombs started to come down, not in combat. If those ships had been in combat, Westerners would have looked at it completely differently. If our fleet had been destroyed at sea in a declared war, we wouldn't have had the reaction that we had after Pearl Harbor. The reason we reacted the way we did was because individuals were sleeping in their bunks and it was Sunday morning and there were no defenses up. There's a lot of incompetence there, but that's the facts of it. So Westerners know what it's like to sleep in. Westerners know what it's like to go to church on Sunday. Westerners can imagine what would happen if you were woken from your sleep by the sound of explosions and then water coming into your compartment and drowning. They can easily imagine that their own sons or their friends were in that situation. So the second Pearl Harbor became clear as soon as America knew what had actually happened by December 8th, or certainly by the 9th. The Army and all the services have more people than they can process. The number of people who volunteered is just absolutely astonishing. And the same kind of thing happened after 9/11. And certainly it's the exact same motive. Bin Laden believed precisely what the Japanese believed, because Bin Laden thought we were like them. He thought that we were essentially, the soldiers were essentially slaves who were put into battle more or less against their will. His Al-Qaeda definitely had people who were highly motivated and very brave and all the rest of it. But he thought that since they had knocked the Russians out of Afghanistan, and Russia, the Soviet Union I should say, the Soviets were so brutal in Afghanistan, Bin Laden figured, well, if we can beat these brutal people who run over villagers with tanks in order to make a point, if we can defeat these brutal Soviets, the Americans would be a piece of cake because they're so soft and they're so friendly and they're so kind. And so all we have to do is hit them hard, and you'll find out that America's a paper tiger. That's precisely what he said. And they watched it on TV in Afghanistan, and he didn't think the towers, he had no idea the towers were going to come down, because he wasn't aware of the fact that structural steel gets soft at a certain temperature, which is below the melting point of aircraft fuel, if you're one of those people. So the towers coming down were an unexpected benefit for him. What was an unexpected, from his murdering point of view, an unexpected loss was he expected those towers to be filled with people, which would have been 30,000 people, 40,000 people killed instead of 3,000 people. So while the buildings came down, which he wasn't expecting, many, many people got out who would otherwise have died, which he also wasn't expecting. But he pretty much thought that was it. He thought he was going to get a sternly worded letter from the United Nations, and that he was going to hear some president stand up before Congress and make all kinds of, thump his chest and all the rest of it. And he thought that we would do what we'd done before. There would be cruise missile strikes, yes, and we'd be doing standoff weapons, yes, and we'd have airstrikes, fine. He doesn't care. He's got religious zealots. And he was building in Afghanistan, he was building the palace of the caliphate. I'm not making that up. He was constructing this giant palace from which Islam would rule the world. And it didn't turn out that way, because he made the same mistake that everybody else does when they look at democracies and see happy, free people who are flabby and having fun and not very serious, kind of simple, just having a good time. And people assume these are degenerates and that their time is over and they're just a piece of cake. Just push them and they fall over. Didn't turn out that way. People who are free are ready to die for that freedom because they understand how unbelievably unlikely their lives were. Any American's life, anybody who was born an American's life was so unlikely compared to human history throughout time and throughout the length of this country. Virtually everybody that joins the military does it for the same reason. They grew up free, and they want their kids to grow up free. And the only way to do that is to get into a uniform and just go and smack the living daylights out of anybody who wants to mess it up. And that's how it works. And anyway, it's a half hour at least on my favorite book, which is by Victor David Hanson. So I feel like an idiot, David, to the degree that I've admired Victor Davis Hanson's current essays. I read them every time they're published. And I only recently found this book, moving books out of my bookshelf, and I saw this book. I said, I never got to read this. And the type was kind of small, and it was a paper book, and I just, So I got it on the iPad and iBooks and on my phone. I just can't stop. I couldn't stop reading them. I'm virtually done. I've got 20 pages left or something. I couldn't stop reading it. And the good news is that that's not the only book that Victor Davis Hanson has written. But if you want to understand not so much military strategy and tactics, although there's a good deal of that too. All of these battles he lays out very clearly. You understand what happened in all of these battles. But that's really just the prelude. If you want to understand why the West is so successful, you have to get to the societal substructure. You have to get to the kind of society that produces these warriors and weapons. It's called carnage and culture. And it's absolutely the best thing I've read in a long time. And next time I see Victor Davis Hanson, I'm going to have a different conversation with him than I did before. What time is it? Yeah, we're cruising along. We'll probably go to 7:30. Another 40 minutes, something like that. 20 minutes. Sorry, somewhere there. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Trying to do them by rank here. Oh, boy. Natka? I have a question here, and the question is a highly ranked question, and the question says, what are some of the similarities and differences between everyday people in Russia and everyday people in the U.S.? Any fun trivia to share? So I'm just going to talk about some of the things that we talked about Russian people and American people. I'm not so much asking your permission as just telling you I'm about to do it because you're sitting right here. Somebody wants to know what everyday people in Russia are like compared to everyday people in America. And I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them the good and the bad. I just wanted to brace yourself so that you didn't burst into flames or anything. Here's the first thing I learned from being engaged to a Russian woman, and I learned this pretty quickly, and that is that I'd be willing to bet you, unless you've been there in the last year or two, I'd be willing to bet you that just about every single American's image of Russia, specifically Moscow, is way, way out of date. Way out of date. Needless to say, most Americans are certainly the kind of people who listen to this show know that it's no longer the Soviet Union, that you're no longer waiting in lines for bread in stores, and that the situation got a little better. But the thing that just really shook me up the most is just how unbelievably advanced that city is. It's just unbelievable. They, when you control the entire wealth of a country and you've got one guy saying we're going to do something, Moscow is astonishingly modern. The cars are amazing. The buildings are largely brand new. The streets are immaculately clean. People are much better dressed than they are in America, probably even better dressed than they are on the streets of New York, I would say, from what I could see. And our entire idea of this society as being kind of this creaky, backwards kind of thing is just not true anymore. That was a bit of a surprise for me. One of the things that I enjoyed quite a lot, was watching Soviet-era movies. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. But I'm here to tell you, we saw together, 8, 9, 10 Soviet-era comedies, and they're hilarious. And if the American people had seen those movies during the Cold War, I want to say they're mostly written in the mid-'60s, late '60s, early '70s, we would have had a different opinion about Russians. I think my favorite one is called Ivan Vasilievich Changes His Occupation. And basically, it's a story of a guy who builds a time machine in his apartment flat, and I like it already. And the kind of petty and small-minded little apartment owner, the supervisor, the guy who reports to the authorities, little petty little tyrant. Well, it turns out this time machine opens this portal to the court of Ivan the Terrible, and needless to say, they switch places. They look exactly the same, and the modern little petty dictator goes back to the court of Ivan. And what is just actually genuinely hilarious is Ivan the Terrible comes to 1969 Russia and acts like Ivan the Terrible. It's wonderful. I've seen a bunch of their movies. They're just really terrific, and she's gonna have to help me out with this. But I don't think there's an American counterpart for this. There are three actors, three Russian comedians, comic actors. They're not comedians, they're comic actors, and the three of them have done an awful lot of work together. I don't know how many films, but I bet it's 20. That's one thing about watching Soviet movies is that it's a pretty small cast. It's a good cast. They're fine actors and they're fine productions, but relatively small compared to the number of people in Hollywood, let's say. However, there's these three guys. One of them is very large and kind of bald and fat and strong, and then one of them has got the face of a clown and was a great clown and has a lot of pathos, a lot of feeling, a lot of depth. And then there's this other guy who's kind of this prissy sort of neurotic coward, and the three of them appear or star in any number of movies. There's probably no end to it. Here they are again. Here they are again. Sometimes the whole movie's about them. Sometimes they just show up. Sometimes it's a little short about them, but here they are again. Sarge56 said the Three Stooges. I thought that at first too, but you can't compare these three guys to the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges, I'm a huge fan of the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges are essentially a one-trick pony, right? It's physical comedy, it's slapstick comedy, and Curly throws in some comic genius just for the giggles. But these guys are not nearly that simple. Any Three Stooges story is virtually interchangeable. And again, I'm a huge fan. I think it's brilliant work. But this is much more subtle than this. It's much more interesting. And these three guys are tremendous. Now, what's especially interesting about this is Natasha was telling me that when she was growing up in Moscow, they don't have Christmas over there. They have it, but they don't celebrate it on the 25th of December. They celebrate it in January. And the big holiday in Moscow, in Russia, is New Year's. New Year's Eve. I'm quite sure that's because New Year's is a non-Christian, non-religious celebration, and people want to celebrate. And if you've got an atheistic society like the Soviets, you got to celebrate something. So they just basically took everything that they used to do at Christmas and they do it on New Year's, and Christmas became a much, much smaller celebration. But New Year's in Russia is a combination of our New Year's in terms of it being a big party, but you have to add in all of Christmas, all of the gift giving, all of the camaraderie, all of the people outdoors, and then the clock at the center of the Kremlin with the golden hand strikes 12, and then Vladimir Putin comes out and talks to the Russian people, and then they party. But what's interesting about the New Year's thing for me was that when Natasha was growing up, back when it was still the late days of the Soviet Union, these comedy movies I was talking about, they'd run them once. They'd run them once a year, and they'd run them at midnight on New Year's at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I guess it's kind of like a safety valve. And all of her friends would just wait for this night, because one night they'd get to stay up all night and watch movies that were genuinely subversive. They weren't destructive of the Soviet state, but they certainly made fun of it. It wasn't the kind of toxic kind of attacks that we see sometimes here against America, but it was definitely having fun with the Soviet system, and it was a pretty fine line to watch. So they don't run those every day. It's like here, it's almost like like that stupid American movie, The Purge. It's like for 12 hours we're going to give you a little taste of freedom here and a little taste of rebellion and so on. So that I thought was very interesting. My favorite thing by far about the difference between American people and Russian people is something that that Natasha still notices. We were just away for Valentine's Day, and still shocks her, and seeing it through her eyes makes me very proud and very very much more aware of it than I used to be. And that's simply this: when she first came here on her first visit, she could not believe how friendly people were in America. She literally had a hard time believing it. I want to say the first time I really noticed this was when we got back to L.A. and went to Whole Foods, and we're stacking up groceries, and the guy says, "Hey, did you find anything?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely great, thanks." "How you doing?" "Good, I'm good. How are you?" "Fine, fine." And start this little conversation. She's standing there practically with her mouth open, just agape at the idea that somebody in service would be talking to the customers as if we were friends, as if we were equals, and we are. And time again, I could see it on her face. Any interaction, any social interaction between people who were professionally there versus their customers. Anytime we went to a restaurant, anytime we went to a retail store, anytime we went anywhere where somebody was behind a counter serving somebody else, she was just astonished at how friendly Americans were and are, and how open we are. And I think she's got it right. This is certainly my feeling about Russians before I met Natasha as well. Americans are very simple, and that's not a bad thing. It's a different thing. Some people think that means we're really stupid. Well, we can see your house from the moon, so I don't know how stupid that makes us, but there you go. But we're very simple, I think, really. Our culture is not terribly deep, and that's okay with me. I don't come from a culture with a 400-year tradition of poetry and Pushkin and Tolstoy. I come from a culture where the only poetry I know is the theme song to Gilligan's Island and the Beverly Hillbillies. And that's fine with me. But it is a lot more simple people, and it's a lot more happy people. It's a lot more friendly people. And the other thing I think that struck me as a big difference between life in America and life in Russia is that she is astonished, amazed, mortified, and furious at the amount of money that this government takes from people like me in taxes. Absolutely outraged and astonished. She's going to be a fine American conservative, as she already is. Astonished that the federal and state governments might take 40% of what I make and provide nothing in return. Our streets are filthy. Our airports are appalling. We arranged to meet in New York City, and she was held up in customs for 3 hours. That's just in customs. I was embarrassed. I was really embarrassed, but I wasn't even ready for what was coming out. Much later, she told me that everybody dreams about going to New York. Natasha had been all around the world, been to London, Paris, Europe, everywhere. She's been everywhere, Egypt, many times, but she'd never been to America before. So we decided to meet in New York City, and she said that when she got off the plane, she could not believe that this was America because the airport was so dingy and old and dirty and just nasty. It just looked like a third world country. Now, John F. Kennedy, I had to tell her, because you got to do something to salvage this. John F. Kennedy International Airport was the first modern airport. It was the first one. I remember seeing it when I was a kid in 1965 or 6. The Pan Am terminal at JFK was a wonder. It was a wonder of the world. It was astonishing. But that was 1965, and it hasn't changed much since then. When we flew to Los Angeles and fought the traffic back out of LAX, and I had to explain to her that Los Angeles, California, which is the center of the universe in terms of culture, the center of the world, it's not just the center of America, it's the center of the world. This is Los Angeles, California, had one airport. She simply couldn't believe it. And a dingy one, an old one, one airport. Moscow has 3. I know London has at least 2. We've got one airport here. And it just utterly astonishes her. And when she finds out how much we pay in taxes here, she gets quite angry. And that's kind of how I feel too, although I hadn't really realized it. So having her here meant that I was aware of people's friendliness in a way I wasn't before, and I'm also aware of the condition of roads in a way I never was before. I'm just used to driving down the 405 and bump, 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 that's just what it is. And when you find out that Russia, you remember they used to be the communists. Remember those guys? Remember the backward people who couldn't build a car and all dressed the same? Remember those guys? at least in Moscow and major cities, their infrastructure is spectacular, and ours is appalling. And she can't understand how a government could take as much money as they do from us and provide such awful, awful, awful infrastructure. And I don't have an answer for it. It just makes me more aware of it. So there's that. So so she's very impressed by the friendliness of people. I haven't been to Moscow yet. I will be there in the summer. And by the way, it's Moscow, and it's not Moscow. Moscow. It's Moscow. And the reason I know this is because we were driving along in the car one day, and we were passing a farm, and she looked out the window and said, "Oh, look at all the cows." All the what? The cows. Those, the cows. I mean, the cows? Yes, the cows. And it's like, no, it looks like Moscow, and everybody I've ever heard pronounce it as Moscow, but it's Moscow. Or Moskova, if you're really in the know. So there's that. Now, there's one more thing I think I'll talk about, because we were talking about this last night, and this is a good one for Team America. Not only are we friendly people, we have something that's virtually unknown in Russia, and it's one of the reasons that Russia is in the shape it's in. And Natasha said that after being here for almost 6 months, she cannot believe that nobody here that she meets, because she only meets conservatives. Now, we got to keep that in mind. She just meets conservatives, which are obviously the best people in the world. But she says that of all the people that she's met here, no one is envious. No one's jealous. If you succeed in America, she says, people are happy for you. Russia's the exact opposite of that. If anybody gets anything better than anybody else, that person must be destroyed. They have to be pulled down. The idea that somebody's doing better than you are is just anathema, and it fills them with rage and anger. And that's part of the... That's actually a much more important thing than you think, because as we were talking about yesterday in a couple trips we've taken back from a 3-hour trip from San Diego and so on, we were talking about that since that in America, we're happy for people's success because we all know we can attain it. We all know that we can, that if we work hard and stay at it, we can have most of the things that people want. And when you're locked into a society where that's not possible, you're filled with resentment because you're powerless. That's what the story is inside America's inner cities. And so it's really true. It's actually true what we all heard when we were kids, that the difference between a capitalist and a communist is if somebody's looking at a beautiful house, the communist says no one should live like that, and the capitalist says everyone should live like that. It's really actually true. We trust each other here in a way that they don't in Moscow. The thing that enraged me the most, and virtually everything that I've learned about Russia. Look, I found a Russian fiance because I love Russian culture and I love the people. I love their history. We've been opposed to them in many ways, and they've done some terrible things. We've done some things too, but it's an incredibly deep country with a huge soul, and they talk about poetry, and they talk about music, and there's so much tragedy there. There's just so much tragedy. So much blood that's been spilled there, and things that we can never, ever imagine here in happy, simple America. We can never imagine what it's like to have an army come right to the heart of our country and kill 20 million soldiers and maybe another 20 million civilians, and have that happen a couple of times with Napoleon, which just can't connect to it. So there's this... The first thing I noticed about talking with her was when we were trying to do something, or trying to do any kind of administrative thing, like get a ticket here or there, or move something from one place to another, or send a gift over, or something like that. It would take forever, and the reason it would take forever most of the time was because it was held up in some kind of Russian system, and every time I would say, well, how is it possible that you guys don't use banks? I mean, I can't imagine a world like that. She said, well, that's Russia. And this, I think, is a very big difference. The American kind of catastrophe is that we pay so much money and we get so little in return. It's absolutely shocking when you see it from the outside like that. The Russian problem is that they do not believe that you can make money. They don't believe that wealth can be created, and that's because they largely don't have a chance to create wealth. Guys, here's the best story I ever heard about modern Russia, and once you hear this story, you understand that country, and you understand everything that's right and wrong with that country. Yes, I remember the Civil War, Jim. I know that the South experienced it, but as a nation, as a modern nation, we don't have any memory of it. So, but here's the story. Here's the story you need to know about Russia. It was told to me by Sasha, the guy who set up that church that I promoted. I'm going to promote again a little bit. In Russia, there was a true story, obviously, and a recent story. He's a chicken farmer. He raises chickens as a business. And because he raises them in such a way, they're done very well, and something about the method that they're brought up in, that these chickens, the method that they're fed, and the method that they're raised and slaughtered, and all the rest, cleared a bar with Iran, with Iranians, and as it turned out, it's very rare for chickens to be processed in such a way that these extremely religious Iranians were comfortable with, but this guy was doing it. And so these Iranian businessmen came to this Russian businessman with his little chicken farm out in the middle of nowhere, and they said, "We are going to make you very, very rich. We are going to give you so much business that you are not going to know what to do with all the money. There's an enormous demand for this back home, and we are going to make you really, really wealthy, and your business is going to get very big and very profitable." And the guy said no, he turned him down. And the Iranian said, "Well, why would you do that?" And the guy said, "If I become a big company, then the government will take everything. Not just a lot of taxes. They'll take everything. They'll take the business. They'll take the property. They'll take the cars. They'll just take it." He said that the only way he's able to live relatively comfortably is to be small enough as to be under the radar. There's not enough there for him to really worry too much about the state coming in and just taking everything he has. That is astonishing to Americans. I'll tell you what else is astonishing to an American kid. The level of corruption, if you have a court case, the court case is often not settled by who's got the best claim or who's got the best lawyer. It's often settled by who can pay the most money to the judge in order to get the judgment they want. But of all the little things I heard about kind of, corruption, the one that blew my mind was that Natasha was telling me that rich people in Moscow, and there's quite a few of them, if they're in a hurry to get across town, hang on now, they will contact emergency services. I don't know exactly how this happens, but they basically contact the people that provide an ambulance, and for enough money, the ambulance will light up with lights and sirens and go screaming through the center of the city, and everybody will get out of the way, and the people who paid them will be right behind them. And basically, they have paid first responders to make a path through traffic, and that's just a cash transaction. And not only is the person who paid for them right behind them, but she said there's also 4 or 5 other cars that are trying to sneak in there and get into the wake of this flashing sirens and everything. It's just astonishing. We just sit there and just amazed. But what I found is that they are very, very deep people, very intelligent people, and very good people. But you got to get to know them. It's not like America where we all are pretty much happy. So what's the problem? It's a society that's had that many people killed, either from overseas agents or from internally. When you have 70, 80 years, and that's just the communists, the czars as well. 70, 80 years of, if you say something, you could be arrested or taken away in the middle of the night. And if you had any innovation, you'd be gone. The great tragedy of the Soviets is that you could have people working on a collective farm, and they're into it, they believe in the Soviet dream. They're building a new Russia. This backwards agricultural country is becoming an industrial powerhouse, and they're the first ones in space. And so there's so many Russians who believed in Soviet communism. And the problem is that you could have a guy working on a collective farm, and he could basically raise his hand and say, "Comrades, there's a better way to do this. If we do this, 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 and this, we'll get more work done, and we'll have more resources." And he's doing it out of love for the Soviet state. He's doing it because he loves the idea of the Soviet Union, and he's just trying to help the collective farm do better. Well, that guy's taken out and killed, and the reason he's taken out and killed, that doesn't happen today, obviously, but in the 30s and 20s, 30s, and 40s, certainly, and then somewhat in the 50s. The reason he was taken out and killed was because he's a free thinker, because he's got his own opinion. He's got the courage to raise his hand, and he's got the intelligence to come up with a solution that no one else has seen, and he's also willing to embarrass the people who've been running the factory or the collective farm this way and show them that they were doing it wrong. And that person has to be killed because they're dangerous. They're dangerous to a totalitarian state. That person's got moral courage, got intelligence, got initiative, and that won't do. And when you literally, genuinely, literally comb those people out of society for 70, 80 years, you are left with a society that's extremely suspicious, and for good reason. For good reason. Nobody walks up and says, "Hey, how's it going?" To strangers, or smile in the elevators. "Hey, good, oh, good. What floor are you going to? 12. Okay, hey, how's your day?" "Well, it's good. I see you got Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yeah, okay, well, you have a good day. Okay, you too." It doesn't happen over there. And the reason it doesn't happen over there is because if you have a conversation like that and you let something slip, you could be killed, and your family could be killed. And when you do that long enough, it naturally enough breeds a sort of a very closed secretiveness about it. But underneath all of that is a huge heart, a huge emotional depth that's been compressed by the nastiness that comes down on them from above, and gives the Russian people a seriousness and a depth that we don't have here. We just don't. We don't have it here because we didn't suffer the way they've suffered. And suffering is what they've done. It makes for some interesting differences. With all of that said, I think the Russian people and the American people are very similar in many, many ways. They're both big countries, and we both think like people from big countries. Natasha loves these trucks, not just these little, toy pickup trucks. She loves these gigantic, huge, Ford or Chevy trucks, these enormous, huge, wide things with, front doors and then back doors, and there's a compartment and this whole thing, and they're spotlessly clean and they're brand new. She just loves them, and she loves them because it's a sign of individuality, and there's nobody telling you anything. She occasionally says, Sarge, I'll answer this for you in 1 second. So she loves that. And there's a word, we were talking about this last night. There's a word that she's used here a couple times, and I realized that I know what the word means, but I don't think I've ever used this word in my life. And that word is forbidden. Is this forbidden? Is it forbidden to do this? Or are we allowed to, do we need a passport to go to Vegas? Do we have to show papers? Is it forbidden, 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 forbidden? She was telling me ever since she's a little girl, she's told what's forbidden and what's not. And forbidden, if I told you guys that something, anything, doesn't matter whether it's important, doesn't matter whether you liked it or not, if I told you it's forbidden, your first reaction as Americans is to say, who the hell are you to tell me what's forbidden and what's not? I got it, guys. I see the question. I'll get to it in a second. It's an American reaction. Rebellion and initiative pays off here. It's how we think. We were created from rebels against the most powerful army and society in the world at the time. We were natural rebels. You're forbidden from doing this. Who the hell are you to tell me anything about what I'm going to do? Who are you? I don't care if you've got a badge. It means nothing to me. What gives you the authority to tell me I can't do this? That's an American attitude, and that's very, very, very different. because it's been rewarded here. That kind of behavior in Russia for a century or so has gotten you killed. And so, as with so many immigrants, it's heartbreaking to explain to her what these socialists are trying to do, because they know. Everybody's asking me the same question. Now, there's one guy who had this question, and then it's been repeated by everybody, and they think I keep ignoring it, but I see it. So here's the question. It's been in capital letters, and I was going to answer it, and I realized I'm going to just let you answer it. And here's the question, Natasha. Besides me, obviously, what do you like best about the U.S.?
People.
The people. Can you tell me more about that?
Happy.
Happy? Open?
Generous.
Generous?
And smiling.
And smiling. Yeah, thank you. That's it. That's pretty much it. Happy, open, generous, and smiling. America's Disneyland, and and we don't realize it, and you won't know how much of a Disneyland you live in until you go someplace that's not Disneyland, and then it'll come to you. Which is that a vacuum? Thought it might have been a drone strike or something coming in. We don't appreciate that, and Tom Bizel says, "Who's bidden? This is forbidden. Who's bidden?" Got a laugh there, Tom Bizelli. Got a laugh from my fiance. Well done. Who's bidden? And why does he own all this stuff? That's forbidden. That's forbidden too. Who is this guy? By the way, Dave Wellman just says, "You can't park here." I believe I just did. But there's this classic story, true story about an Englishman visiting America in the 1800s and comes up against a cowboy, some ranch, just a cowboy. And he looks like a working cowboy, and he's, dirty, and he's dusty, and he's got his hat on, and he's, picking up his saddle and all the rest of it. And this British guy says, "My good man, what is the name of your master?" Meaning he wanted to talk to the guy in charge. And the cowboy turned to him and he said, "That some bitch ain't been born yet." And, there it is. They want you to come to the mic. They're like begging you to come over here on camera and say hi. Oh, she's such a trooper here. Okay, here's a drum roll. Here we go. Come on in, as last time. Hi everybody, and thank you for the many kind words. We were looking at the comments from the picture we posted on Facebook the other day, and you have no idea how much it means to us. We went down and did an event in San Diego a couple days ago, and being able to point to her in the crowd and stand up on stage and say, this is my fiance, and she's the best photographer I've ever seen, it's wonderful for me. But everybody that she's met, and she's met a few people here, everybody that she's met has been gracious and kind and generous and all the rest. And that's because they're you. That's because they're you people. That's because I got the best people in the world.
That's true.
That is true.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say to the American savages out there?
No, I would like to say that I appreciate being here very, very much. And I love those people.
And that's from an American who happened to be born overseas. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wave goodbye to the happy folks. Natasha's an American, happened to be born overseas, and I find myself really feeling very, very proud to think that on some level I'm half Russian. I'm obviously not exactly half Russian, but they're my people now. And there's so much there. There's so much there. There's so much intelligence. There's so many resources. There's so much there. And it's just got to be set free. It's just got to be set free, but it's going to be very, very difficult. These attitudes are just built so deep into the culture. It's very, very tough. But I love them already, and it's been enormous fun for me, and a great delight and an honor and a joy to get introduced to this country that is my country now too, that I haven't been to yet, and I feel like I'm starting to get to know. I mean, it's going to be a kick for this guy who wanted to be an Air Force pilot for first third of his life to do what I'm going to do in several months or so, somewhere in the summer, and that is I'm going to be doing live reports from Red Square. And I'll be in Red Square, and we'll be doing either Facebook Live or we'll record segments that we'll then, put up on Facebook here and on our website. And I'm going to be standing in Red Square, and behind me will be the Kremlin, the real Kremlin, the Kremlin. It's unbelievable. We're going to Washington for CPAC. If any of you are going to be there, and she gets to see Washington. Washington's not quite the den of vipers that it was prior to November, but it's still a fairly disgraceful place given the history of this country and what actually goes on in Washington. However, with that said, Washington, D.C. is spectacularly beautiful. Everybody says that we love having you here in America and things like that, so it's just really sweet. When you go, I saw the Capitol building, I want to say is 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, 2009, 10, somewhere in there, so 6, 7 years ago, I guess. And I understand how this country works, but when I stood there on the mall and looked up at the Capitol building, it's almost unreal how beautiful that building is. It doesn't seem like it could be real. It's so classical. It's so classically perfect, and at the same time, it represents so much freedom, so much power, so much success, and it's been badly abused lately. And I'll wrap this discussion up by telling you the one thing. I told you many things where it makes me feel good to be American. Here's the thing that makes me genuinely, not only ashamed, but genuinely worried, and that is to hear how often I hear that Russia is a much freer place than America is in many different ways. Despite the fact that there's all these things that are forbidden, there are things in American culture that were restricted from doing by those nasty progressives, and to hear that Russia has freedoms to do things that we don't have in America anymore is enough to make me just plain batty. It just makes me nuts. And somebody says when I see, speaking of the Capitol being so beautiful, they said when I first see St. Basil's for the first time, I'm going to have the same reaction. It's just like, it can't possibly be real, When I first met her, I told her I wanted to visit Moscow, but I wanted to go in the winter because, what's the point of seeing Moscow if you don't go in the winter? I mean, everything about Moscow, the history of Moscow, and everything I know about Moscow has been the winter. You stop the Napoleon sacks Moscow and burns it to the ground, and then he goes home and he's stopped by the winter. And the Russians are they're 8 miles outside of Moscow, and the Germans are stopped by the winter and the cold. And Moscow is the coldest place in the world. And if you're going to go see Moscow for the first time, you should go in the winter. And then she told me about how absolutely insane that is. And having watched the weather reports in Moscow lately, I begin to realize, no, that's just batty. It's negative 30 degrees out there and windy. Here's a cute little thing that I wasn't expecting, by the way. Once she got to Los Angeles, and she was here in July and August, and for the entire time that she's been here since then, Natasha has never been this cold, ever. She's constantly talking about how cold it is, and I know that sounds contradictory and just nuts, but we fight we fight outdoors, right? In America, we run the air conditioning so often and so frequently, and so intensely that the inside of a building in America, I'll bet you, is 15 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than it is in Russia. In Russia, in the winter, you've got it negative 30 degrees outside, and when you go inside a building, you want to be warm right away. And I suspect that one of the things I'm going to notice is I'm probably going to be about as uncomfortable temperature-wise in Russia as Natasha has been here. While she's being freezing cold all the time, I'm going to be able, like, my God, I simply don't know how I can breathe. It's 80 degrees Fahrenheit inside these buildings, because if they turn the heat off, everybody dies. It's kind of a downer. So it is interesting for me to be the kid who was born in New York City, but I grew up in Bermuda, Florida, and California, and I'm walking around in in a t-shirt. It's 57 something Fahrenheit. It's brisk. It's not cold. It's brisk, and she's from Siberia, and she's freezing, and it's just interesting and cool. Boy, so many comments here. You need to take me to Banya. Big laugh. What's Banya?
Sauna, but it's different.
It's a different kind of sauna? All right, then. I'm going to book my trip
It's
to
very Russian.
book my trip to Banya right away. We have to do Banya. We have to do a report on Banya or from Banya, something like that. She's laughing again. I think I'm in for a pleasant or a weird surprise. So anyway, I'll be going in the summer. We've got her visa status is interesting. When you apply for resident alien card, your tourist visa goes away, and you don't have a new one yet, and you basically become a kind of in no man's land. But needless to say, we're going to do this exactly the right way, and we're waiting in line. It's a 3-year process, and it's thousands of dollars, and worth every bit of it. And she's not only looking forward to being a resident alien, she's looking forward to being a citizen. If only she could find somebody who could describe to her how America works so she could pass the citizenship test. That's going to be the challenge for her, is finding somebody who could clue her in on things like how the Congress works and stuff like that. Well, it's been a fun show, actually. Been a really fun show. It's 20 after 8. I think we'll call it a night. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys. It's nice to be talking to you every day on the live show, for those of you that are watching. And again, the Stratosphere Lounge is a special show. I've never seen anything quite like it anywhere. I've seen a lot of webcam shows, and I've seen a lot of commentators, but I've never seen a show quite like this. This personal with the people who we see every single week for years and years and years now. 5 years, I think, it's coming up, 5 years. So it's an absolute joy. It's like a family meeting. It's like seeing friends again. We're starting to get the right angles are on autopilot. We're going to get a couple more things kind of spinning. The live show's almost on autopilot. Moving it back an hour is going to help us enormously. Neil's awesome, and we'll get Neil on camera. It's Vanya, not Banya, right? Vanya? It's not Banya. It's Vanya.
No, Banya.
Banya. Okay. So I think that'll do it. Oh, by the way. If you're going to have borscht, for Christ's sake, eat beets for 2 weeks in advance. Start with a little piece of one, and then a half of one, and then a whole one. Because if you, like most Americans, don't get a lot of beets in your diet, then borscht is gonna blow your mind. It's like eating blood. It's so red. It's so red. It's just like, oh my God. Anyway, she makes a great borscht, and I'm just too much of a American savage to appreciate the finer things in life. So there we go. And we will see you hopefully next Wednesday. I don't see any reason why not, unless we're not out of town next Wednesday. I think it's the week after. Let me double check. We're going to be at CPAC, so any of you there, love to see you. Let's see what we got here. Wednesday. Hey, how about that, the 22nd? We will not be here next Wednesday. We will be in Washington, D.C. at CPAC. So if any of you are going to be there, we'll look forward to seeing you. Definitely come up and say hi. Expect we'll be there. We'll be back the week right after that, right? Yeah, the 1st of March. Looks good. I think we'll be here. So in any event, we won't see you next week, but we'll see you the week after that. Thanks so much for all of you and the kind words, especially not just for me, but for my lovely fiance, who's love of my life and the best thing that ever happened to me by far. Yeah, great show, Tavares. You're welcome. Thank you, Comrade Brent Cates. Yeah, and Foghorn, my pilot, says you've definitely improved the scenery here in the Stratosphere Lounge. You know, the scenery is much better when you're on camera. Look, I know an insult when I hear it, okay? I know when I'm being insulted to my face, so I'm just going to cut this feed right now, and that ought to show you guys. So we will see you tomorrow for those of you watching live, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for the Stratosphere Lounge. It's number 146, I think, out of the way. Thanks again for the kind words, and as always, thanks especially to our members at BillWhittle.com who make this possible, and if you're not a member of that club, then you ought to be. If you're not a member of the club, you're a communist, and let's just call it what it is. And I just don't see how America can have this many communists in it, and the vacuum squad is coming for me, so we will see you next week.